have the Environmental Performance Committee meeting of 5th of May.
Yeah, I'm happy to
Councillor
move.
White. Yep.
Yes.
Councillor White moves.
So I'm happy to move. Just wanted to comment on a couple of things, and that's just we've got a standing item on there which is to do with the update on territorial authorities, Three Waters compliance, and just wanted to let you know that overall compliance is improved at the sites operated by the TAs, so that's good news. Also, we had a really good, very interesting report from Bruno David on environmental DNA, which is a really useful tool, especially in aquatic environments. And just wanted to let others know that there is a really good presentation that we can share if they weren't able to be at the meeting. So just wanted to raise that. Also wanted to just raise the fact that Minister Parker had written to us specifically with some concerns about management of sediment pollution and an Environmental Defence Society video which they'd seen, which featured the Waikato, particular incidents in the Waikato, and he wanted us to respond to what we are doing in that space. So yeah, that was covering things like intensive winter grazing, urban developments, including quarries and managed fills, plantation forestry, and clearance of native vegetation and adjacent to waterways. But if anybody has any questions.
Seconded by Councillor Teague. Questions? Yep. Councillor Hudson.
Yeah, just wondering what examples of intensive winter grazing in the Waikato are you using? What's the point of that? With the relevance to the Waikato?
Yeah, so that it was raised that there were some things which were in the video which were more specific to Southland, but there were some incidents that were in the video that were supposedly specifically from the Waikato, which we needed to respond to. But if there's anyone here who would like to comment further on that?
I'll ask the CEO to comment further with clarification, and also whether there's been any response to the Minister at this stage. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Through the Chair. That there has been a response to the Minister, and it was a comprehensive letter showing all the efforts that we've gone to in the Waikato to try and manage sediment, and right across from the education end to the what we've been taking from the compliance point of view. But the video had showed, it was quite some time ago that video came out. It had showed, particularly in Auckland, sediment coming off building sites, and it showed intensive winter grazing with sediment running off farms in Southland. I think there was a brief 1 or 2 second bit about dirty water in the middle of some rain in the Hauraki Gulf, sort of just off the road by the Hauraki Gulf, but there was nothing indicating where it came from, and the inference that came from plantation forestry harvesting. So we had responded to it in a very comprehensive way, and the report to the EDC was showing that. It was focused on sediment. Intensive winter grazing, we hadn't reported anything. We haven't done any monitoring on intensive winter grazing. We aren't aware of any major intensive winter grazing in the Waikato, but we've been caught up in the regulations because it's nationwide. But the focus of that letter, the incident in the Waikato was more in a forestry situation.
Councillor McPherson.
Can I just...
Yeah, I'll come back to you after. Keep your light on. Councillor McPherson.
Well, actually, I'm happy to wait for Stu, but I want to push back on what's just been said.
Right, Stu?
Did we take advantage as a council to encourage government to clean the sediment traps along our rivers? The 14 sediment traps alone on the Waihaupiako that we no longer clean out. Did we take advantage to show them that if they want to reduce sediment into the Gulf, that they could perhaps clean out the sediment traps that ratepayers can no longer afford to clean out? Or the catchment dams that come down off the Tauhei Hills that we've heard about for 9 years being chock-a-block with sediment. Do we clean those out and start using them not as water traps anymore, but as sediment traps? Did we give government any of those great ideas from this council? Or do we just go along without talking to anyone in the rural areas?
I don't believe that was in the letter.
Okay. What a shame, what a miss. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson?
Oh, I want to just make sure I understood what Kathy said. Kathy, did you say the Minister said there was some intensive winter grazing practices that he was commenting on in the Waikato?
Right. Hit yours and then she'll come back on. Hit it now, Andrew.
I've got two questions.
Yeah, well, ask both questions and then get a response. Okay.
Well, actually, it's a comment. I think we need to be extremely careful right now about the use of that term, intensive winter grazing, because thanks to that video, that has connotations of dairy cows standing up to their udders in mud. It has connotations of deer lying around in squalor dying, and we don't see that in the Waikato. So if our minister is saying, or even hinting, that he believes that intensive winter grazing is practiced in the Waikato, we should be pushing back, because we don't see that. What we do see is when we drive to the Coromandel, as I did the other day, or we drive to the King Country, as I do regularly, in the winter, when it's raining, behind electric fences, you see some green paddocks turning brown. That must, by definition, mean that there's some sediment issues, but it's not intensive winter grazing. So I take your point, Mr. Chief Executive. We are in the middle of forming regulations around this matter, but we should be really careful to push back on loosey-goosey language, especially coming from a minister, if those practices are not observed in our rohi, because they aren't.
So, before you respond, can you also clarify for me whether that, I understand it was a video that had these things in it. Did the video define location, or was it just showing practices? So just, you know, because I think that's a relevant matter, but very specifically identified a location.
If I could respond to that through the chair. The video didn't show any agricultural practices in the Waikato whatsoever. As I said, it showed intensive winter grazing in Southland, it showed sediment coming off building sites in Auckland, it showed, I think, some forestry in Marlborough in particular, and it just showed this little shot on the side of the road in the Firth of Thames with some dirty looking water. By innuendo, it was from forestry in the Coromandel. And I think with the regulations, they did come out with regulations which covered the whole country. There has been a bit of pushback from the regional sector, and they're re-looking at those regulations on intensive winter grazing now, and the requirements of our council to have to monitor. But there's also a definition of sacrifice paddocks, which is what I think you referred to when you drive across the Waikatoregion Plains recently. And it's not caught up in the intensive winter grazing. It is a separate matter in there, and it's not as consent requiring as the intensive winter grazing regimes.
Councillor White, would you like to add a response to that?
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment that it was in the letter from David Parker referring to the video and the Waikato being mentioned, and that they wanted us to respond. But it was made clear in our EPC meeting that the things to do with intensive winter grazing weren't actually to do with our region. And my understanding is that we communicated that to David Parker, that we did make that really clear, that those images were actually not something that happens in our region. So the bulk of the letter actually, was talking about what we're doing in terms of our policies and plans and what we're doing in response. And it talked about things like the forestry compliance strategy that was developed and the zone plans to drive land management practice improvement, all the soil management and erosion control things, the earthworks, all of the things that we actually are already doing. So it was quite a comprehensive letter that went back to him. And I don't know if we've had a response. Have we had a response from him? Did we expect one? No. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Remington?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I echo the previous speakers, because the letter from Minister Parker, and I quite like David, but the letter really was it was a catch-all in regard to it was it was naughty, to be honest. The letter was naughty. I mean, intensive winter grazing, as a previous speaker said, is not a practice in the Waikato. It is in the South Island. The reason they've got big herds in the South Island that are trucked sometimes 200 to 300 kilometres away to professional graziers that actually, I think, the practice needs to stop. And these big feed pads, often they're beef as well, that you saw, I think it's the Ashburton area, again, it was spun in a way, it was kind of dairy farmers kind of involved in not sacrifice paddocks, but intensive winter grazing. And to be honest, I mean, it was in the motive video deliberately spun in a way to actually get the reaction that was wanted. And then he actually was very clever. Goebbels would have been proud of him. He spun it as if it was Waikato. And it's not the Waikato. People need to know the difference between sacrifice paddocks and intensive winter grazing. That's a
Thank you,
issue.
Councillor Remington.
I haven't finished yet.
Yep. Oh, okay.
And also in regard to the angle of grazing, again, that's Southland as well.
Yeah.
But I think, Mr. Chair, as a new chair, you might want to ask Mr. Parker, where are we after 3 years in regard to the environment plans that were actually the leading edge formulated by this council that should be in place right through this nation. Instead of that, they've captured it, and now they've spun it to such a degree that it'll be so kind of complicated with labour, shading for animals, etc. I don't think it'll end at light of day. And when they actually leave office next year, I think that's when this council has to say, right, let's get this environment plans underway.
Thanks, Councillor Remington. I do think this council is leading in terms of those water quality areas in terms of change. You've only got to look into our efforts around PC1, which were some of the leading New Zealand at the time.
It was the leading.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Remington. We have Councillor Tegg.
Yeah, I think the issue of winter grazing is a red herring. I mean, there isn't any in the Waikato, but there surely is sedimentation going into the Firth of Thames, and we know that because the mangroves are expanding exponentially year on year. And how do they grow? They grow because there's more sediment for them to grow into. So there is a problem with sediment, and it's not just in the rural areas. That video clearly showed there was quite substantial runoff from urban development and subdivision and so on. So I think it doesn't behove us well to sort of try and divert attention away from the issue by just talking about winter grazing. There's actually a serious problem with sedimentation in our region.
Yes, good point. So we have a mover and a seconder. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So we now move on to the Contracts Committee. I'll ask Councillor McPherson to take this because I had declared, I think, a conflict of interest. Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Minutes of the 9th of May on page 40.
There were two items, I think, in that meeting. Chair Quayle absented himself because of a potential conflict of interest, and that matter was dealt with. And so I put these minutes in front of the council for recommendation.
Right. They're all Section A items. So you move, Councillor McPherson, seconder being Councillor Remington. Councillor Remington. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Now we move on to the next item, which is on page 43, which is Finance and Services Committee. And there was a lot considered that committee. We had a lot to get through, but looking at them all, we have Section A items, and just making sure one item at the conclusion on the warm homes, don't we? We have to adjust that. So we have a adjustment, just to explain the adjustment there. that there was a resolution to extend the Warm Homes contract. At the time, the council committee wasn't aware that the contractor was going to withdraw. So the contractor withdrew because of financial reasons. So we are now having to step back on that extension. So that's why you see it worded in the way it is, that recommendation. So I will move that resolution. Do I have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor McPherson. All those in, did you want to speak to that at all? No, right. So, right. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So we move on to Waikato Plan Leadership. We covered that. Janine, Janine, you wanted, I missed you sitting there.
Sorry, Mr Chair, there is the additional resolution that's included in the report at page
To section B, is it? Yes, 43.
Around acknowledging that the previous recommendation now isn't required. There was around providing direction to staff on whether council still wished us to go to market around an alternative provider. Acknowledging the intent or council direction that's been set in relation to the eco retrofit program anyway. So this would be a very short-term stopgap arrangement.
So that staff are seeking a view of council what we do in this situation. I'll start off the discussion by saying that I believe that we can wait for the time into next year, because the winter is, by the time you engage somebody, and because you're going to end up in next winter anyway. So we should advise staff, in my view, that we should target the next financial year's winter for ensuring that we go through the appropriate processes to end up with a new contractor. In my view, the requirement hasn't gone away. It's, we still need to be moving on the particulates and all the issues that we have in that area. So that's my position. Is there any other comment on that matter? Yes, Councillor White.
Yeah, I just would like to, this is something that's been going on for quite a long time. I can't remember exactly how long this particular project has been going on, but I am conscious of a few things, and that is that we're running out of opportunities in terms of the owner-occupied homes. And so I just had a question around that. Talked about the fact that rental properties are often the ones that need work done, and I know that the South Waikato District Council is doing some work in that area, but I'd really like to understand, what does the South Waikato District Council think about this at the current state? So that's one question, and because I don't know that we should actually push on and sort of do the work in terms of the market process if there isn't sufficient demand for what we're currently doing. So just some questions around that, if
So
Janine could
a question
answer
on demand. Do we know the demand and then the way forward?
that. Oh, there you go.
That's good.
Through you, Mr Chair, the report that had been presented to the Finance and Services Committee proposed an extension of the criteria for eligibility for the scheme anyway, acknowledging that if we stuck with the existing criteria, the pool of opportunity was quite small. So it was looking to expand the opportunity provided through the scheme and to align that with the ECA scheme criteria specifically, and I think probably better aligned with the South Waikato approach as well. So that was the recommendation that came through the Finance and Services Committee, which was supported. Unfortunately, it's now the provider who would have been leading that for us has expressed that they won't be continuing with the contract. So the position that council is in is for the coming year, work is to be undertaken in terms of standing up the eco retrofit program anyway, which would provide a different mechanism to assist some of these properties. So it's whether there's something that we do short term, and I think the Chair's point is there is time that's required to actually undertake another market approach and evaluation. So there would be some delay in actually being able to provide or get in place a new service provider for the short term.
It's not often that this council is able to say that we welcome government support in this space, but I understand that there's some moves on the sustainable homes side of things, and I'd like the CEO to make a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. So it does refer to that in the resolution, and Karen informs me, and she might be able to comment, that the approaches that we've made to government and to MB to try and change the Credit Control Financing Act to be more friendly towards us to be able to provide this type of scheme. This sounds like there's been some quite positive movement there, and the staff in MB are trying to make corrections for it. Have I got that right, Karen?
Councillor Burko.
Yeah, just a question. I thought that South Waikato District Council were the lead agency for this. I used to have Neil Sinclair babbling in my ear to say, don't you take the funding away because we've got other projects ready to go. We really need your funding. Is that not the case?
So I believe the scheme does work very much hand in hand with South Waikato, and they would normally be leading in terms of the home heating, the insulation, and then following that with the home heating. In terms of this latest resolution, no, that hasn't been discussed with them because the immediate issue was the resolution that had been put to the Finance and Services Committee, which would have supported the scheme more extensively. And so the alternative provider would be something that we would need to have a conversation with them about, which we haven't done.
There's a number of action points that have, I think, been put tabled here. So I'd like to, with the council's consent, have those recognised as action points for the staff, and then them to be referred back to the appropriate committees, because there's a couple of them. And with the council permission, rather than have a whole new resolution, I think we'll take all those as, because there's some very good points made, pick up all those. Staff, I think, are well aware of what those are, and we'll have those reported to the appropriate committees. Are you all happy with that? Thank you. Thank you. So with that, we're able to move forward to the next set of minutes, which is Waikato Plan Leadership Committee of the 9th of May, and that's on page 55. Page 55. Who's introducing this? Katarina, these are all Section A items, so they're just for noting. Section B, do you want to make any comments?
I can make a comment. I was there.
Yes. Councillor Nicol.
The main things to be aware of that the Waikato Plan's currently discussing is they've got a symposium at the university next Tuesday, 5th of July. I imagine everyone's had an invite. And the other piece they're discussing at the moment is considering that they are a committee of our council. They're looking at their structure and what would be best going forward based on the progress they've had over the last couple of years, so that that could be presented to the new council and the new training. That's what they're working on mainly, and the work streams are progressing with what they've been getting on with.
And can I add that because the commissioners finished today of Waikato District Health Board, it signals that Margaret Wilson will no longer be a representative of the Waikato District Health Board. So she chairs this particular committee, and she's also the representative of the DHB. So she has signalled that due to the changes, there's that big possibility that she will not be available.
So with the council's permission, I'd like to take an action point. We have a sort of a period of 2 months for council to note that we'll pick up just her honorarium just for those 2 months from the end of June when the DHB closes to the end of August, which is when that term of that committee expires. So if you're happy with that, and I'll take that as an action point. Just a couple of things or one other thing to note here. Councillor Hodge, do we remove you as being in attendance at that meeting and being an apology instead? Because it's noted down as in attendance. Yep. Thank you. Yeah.
You were on briefly, but I was on.
So we'll put part attendance or words to that effect. So any other comments to be made? Do you want to move that, Councillor Nicol? Can we have a part attendee second that? Yep. So Councillor Hodge, you'll second that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So we now move on to the Regional Transport Committee.
I move.
Moved by Councillor Burko, seconded by, do we have a seconder who was in attendance? Councillor Remington. Thank you, Councillor Remington. Any matters to be raised, Councillor Burko?
Zero, sir.
Right, thank you. Oh, question from, do you want to hit your light there?
Councillor Burko, please give me the update on the numbers of the Tahuya. Is it per day? What's it averaging at this point in time?
Press your button. Press your button.
They're on there today because today hasn't finished, so therefore we cannot calculate what is today. I can give you historical figures, and that is the best I can do. And well, up till today includes today, I would assume, on that question that you're asking me. Patronage. Of course, I've got the answer. Patronage is increasing, and it's averaging something over 200 people, and it's going up all the time. What's the numbers? Mark Tamura is sitting in the back there, and he has got exact numbers up to including today. Mark, give us a guess. And nobody in this room knows, so whatever figure you give her is going to be the correct one.
Mark, welcome you to. Do you want to come to a mic somewhere?
Perhaps I could help you.
Yeah. Well, I've invited Mark to give us numbers, and then we'll see, Russ, whether your numbers agree with Mark's numbers.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to be able to report that patronage post the initial bump that we had over the previous school holiday period, which coincided with the 50% reduction in fares, has been sustained. It's of course come off the immediate peak, but the growth pattern has continued. We're now averaging around 218, I think. I wouldn't quote me on that last digit in there, but around that number per day patronage, which is a very pleasing number for us, because once we broke over the 200 per day line, that is our break-even point for carbon emissions versus travel to Auckland via private motor vehicles. So that's where we're sitting at the moment, Mr. Chair.
So that sounds to me like a press release. Councillor White was first up.
Oh yeah, look, I've just had questions recently to do with Bully Point, which is on State Highway 1 between Taupo and Turangi, an area which has been a problem in terms of road safety for a long time and keeps ending up in the Regional Land Transport Plan and getting bumped because of the cost and difficulties to do with it. I just wondered whether there has been an update on what's happening with Bully Point.
Probably not. It's known. You brought it up when you were on, and it comes up regularly. Bully Point is a safety issue, and it is recognised on there. At this stage, it hasn't made the #1 priority to actually happen. But yeah, it's there, the same as the Thames to Coromandel Road is there every time we look at priorities. Yes, it's there. Yes, it needs improvement. And so with others all through the region, it's how much money has the region got to do these improvements?
So it's quite a significant one because it basically blocks State Highway 1 completely. It's such a narrow road going around all of those points. But I also just wanted to know, I know that there were negotiations going on with iwi because there's, proposal to do that bypass road and it would go through Māori land. I just wondered, do we have support from iwi on this proposal? Or do, what are the obstacles, I suppose, in terms of getting it made a priority?
All I can say is that NZTA is working on that together with others and
Mark?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, the Regional Transport Committee did make some appeals about the scope of some road safety improvements that are on the Waka Kotahi program at the moment to seek its extension to include Bully Point. That was recently done by way of a variation to the transport plan which the Waka Kotahi needed to do in order to get their works underway. But we haven't received a further update since having made that appeal to them.
Oh.
We can absolutely seek that.
Last question or comment from Councillor Remington.
No, it's a supplementary question, Barry. I did indicate I had two questions. Chair Burko, just tell me what other plans have you got to increase the patronage on the Te Hui? Given that there's a $96 million investment, 200 is good per day, but not good enough. So what are plans for your committee to increase the patronage from here on in?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Remington. At the meeting that I was at when all these things were explained, I'm happy to refresh your memory, sir. We looked at doing some of the improvements and increasing or changing extra trains and various other things that we believed that we could do within the money that we had available. I wrote to the chairman of the board, and the reply that we got was not pleasing, where it said, if you haven't done the business case, you cannot do this. Any surplus that you have in funds, well, we haven't received the funds, they're just tagged in the budget, will return to NZTA to reallocate, and it was a letter that we said, oh, bother. From there, at the meeting, we discussed what we could do, and NZTA extremely helpful. Deborah Hume is the new person that we've got that is our liaison. David Shepherd, that used to be Kiwi Rail, has now gone to NZTA. He is supporting, and NZTA are totally supportive of us without doing masses of work on a new business case to give a simple explanation that our patronage has changed. We're now looking at bringing more people from Auckland down to Hamilton, and NZTA are supporting all of these variations if they get it in a simple format as opposed to a detailed business case. So we're saving a lot of money and we've got support to go forward.
Thank you.
Oh, that's good. And just finally, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to serve on the Working Party without voting rights. Thank you for the luxury.
Thank you, councillors. We have a mover and a second. I'd like to put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So we now move on to Lake Taupo Protection Project Joint Committee. Kathy.
Happy to move. Just wanted to just raise a few things from the meeting. We had an update on the review of the Lake Taupo Protection Project. Basically, that's just pointing out that that we have selected some options of groups who could do the review. I just don't know if Neville wants to comment any further on that, whether we've had an update on that. Just a couple of other things that I also wanted to just mention from that meeting. That was, we had a 6-monthly report and also budget from the Lake Taupo Protection Trust. I just wanted to know, just in the budget of the trust, it actually talked about wind-up costs of $368,000, GST included. I'd really like some advice from somebody as to whether whether that figure is actually, it sounds like an awful lot of money to me, and I'd really like to know whether that is a realistic figure, because that concerns me if that's the real wind-up costs. That's the projected wind-up costs given to us by the trust. And also just, I've raised the issue before that at the moment we've only got one representative from Te Whatutoa on this committee, that we actually need two, otherwise we sometimes end up in a position where we can't have a meeting because of failure to have a quorum. So that's happened, it did happen twice in a row. So I just wanted to know, have we made any progress in that space? In terms, because it's very important that we don't suddenly have to fail to have a meeting when it's about something as important as that review, and that we need to get that review finished by the end of this term. So if you could just comment on those things, would be grateful. Thanks, Neville.
I'm aware that this council has had quite an acute interest in this space, so welcome the Director Williams to respond.
Morena Council, pleasure to respond to the questions posed by Councillor White. Taking the last question in regard to the Trust's additional member, my understanding is that Tanganui Kingi, who's a councillor for Taupo District Council and also a governance representative of Te Whare Māori Trust Board, has agreed to come back on, and as you know well and truly, Councillor White, he has been a member of the committee in the past, so they're meeting their obligations, and Peter Shepherd will maintain his role as I understand it. In regard to the 300,000 plus figure that's proposed by the Trust for the wind-up costs, that wasn't, in my view, substantiated by any in-depth analysis. And the question that I posed at the time, or raised at the time, was around the NDRAs themselves, the nitrogen discharge reduction agreements, and as we know, previously, Council, we had asked for those to have oversight of those agreements to understand what was involved in them. So the key costs seem to be associated with the novation of those contracts and their reassignment should that be required. We don't know whether or not that would be a true and reasonable cost, given we've never clapped eyes on the damn thing. So sorry about my language, but it's frustrating from the perspective that we've tried really hard over many, many meetings to get our hands on them, and they've been restricted from us. So I can't really comment too much on the costs that have been proposed, but they do seem quite high. And in regard to the process that the official working group, who include myself as a representative for WRC, so from an operational perspective, members from Taupo District Council, from the Crown, and also a participant from Te Whare Māori Trust Board. We are the ones who are managing the tender process for the review to be undertaken. Tenders have been received from PwC and KPMG, and we are currently under negotiation with those two providers to try and get the best deal possible. We still haven't had a final decision on the costings yet, but both proposals were incredibly robust and thorough, and no doubt that both parties have both the capacity and the capability to undertake the work that we're requiring. So it's just now a matter of getting a final agreement on the cost and who's paying.
Right. I have the first question, and that'll be that there's public money involved in here, and so therefore one would have thought that there should be some transparency around the costs, and would council be able to, under the various acts that can seek to find information on the financials, is that an option, or is the secrecy of that expenditure well and truly wrapped up?
My understanding, and this is based on our own legal advice, is that we can, and we're talking about the costs associated with the wind-up, that there is a view that yes, we can request and expect to get that information. And this is based on previous legal advice we'd received in respect to having oversight and more understanding of the composition of these nitrogen discharge reduction agreements, which I think are the key cost element associated with what's being quoted. That request was rejected by the Joint Committee on the recommendation of the Trust. So I think without going through a disputes procedure and potentially something that's quite litigious and difficult, we're kind of stuck in that situation still.
Just a comment from the CEO on that matter, because I think this would be of interest. You know, what is our position when you have such monies and a lack of response? So maybe invite the CEO to make a comment.
Based on what we've just heard today, I think the most appropriate thing I could do is go back and work with the person who manages the trust to find another avenue through this. Certainly, with reference to the comment that Councillor White made about the wind-up costs in its own right, with no transparency as to how those costs would be incurred, I think we also need to get information on that. But I think that would be, I don't have any other advice other than Neville has given to the council, but I'll personally take that up with the trust.
Thank you. I have speakers, Councillor Story.
Yeah, my level of discomfort with this is at an all-time high. We have been talking about this situation pretty much this entire triennium. We have, as a council, expressed our concern about the costs associated with this. We have asked questions around what is the true workload, asked for justifications around the costings. The lack of transparency that you're referring to today, Neville, has been consistent in terms of the questions and clarifications we've sought in the past. I am concerned that this continues to stay on our agenda, and it seems as though there is no reasonable way to come to any sort of a conclusion here. It almost feels like arrogance that there would be absolutely no justification of the wind-up costs that are presented, and we're expected to just go sweet as. I think just looking at the decision around the remuneration of the trustees, you know, there are nonprofits operating across this country where people, for the good of the community, offer their skill and their expertise free of charge, and to have this trustee remuneration, $22,000 for the chair, $13,000 for trustees, plus expenses for an organization that, based on the information I've received across this triennium, it does not have anywhere near the workload to justify those rates for trustees or the expenses that seem to be reported here. I hear what you're saying, Mr. CEO, that you're going to go back and have yet another conversation. We've had multiple conversations. They never seem to come to any fruition. My concern is broader than this joint committee. My concern is about further types of joint committees that we as a council might enter into in the years to come. And where is our avenue to address these types of issues where we end up at a stalemate, it seems. And our only way out is, as you have indicated, Neville, expensive, litigious processes. There's got to, when we enter into these types of agreements, there's got to be a much greater level of clarity as to how we're going to address differences in opinions around these things, and find a way through. I am frustrated that this continues to present itself on our agenda, and I would love to see an action point in terms of how we as a council will enter into arrangements like this in the future to prevent these circumstances from arising again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I have Councillor Remington next.
I concur with Councillor Story, and I just want to congratulate Councillor White for being so strong in regard to this matter, to bring it before this council, this body 3 years ago, Kathy, and there was nothing in it for you. It was just what was right, and that was why you raised it, and you took a lot of pushback, and you handled it extremely well. But they continue to actually, I've got to be careful the way that I put it, but they are really just nearly giving us the fingers. And Mr. CEO, this comes, don't go. This comes down to you. You're a good CEO. I think you're a very good CEO, but you've just got to get a grip of this because it's just not on for not have a quorum one day and to put the pressure onto our Councillor White. And also, I think Neville is struggling with this and has, because it's got more politics than Pakistani Parliament. But we've got to, for the right of our ratepayer, land this fairly. It's a physically and from a fiscal viewpoint as well. So, Mr. CEO, you have to get a grip of this. And it should be, it's not funny, it should be one of your important projects between now and the end of this triennial. I think we've achieved much. We've achieved plenty, all of us have. But this is one we have failed. And now we're putting it into your court to fix it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Remington. Councillor McPherson?
I agree with the previous two speakers. I think that this represents an abject governance failure on our behalf now. To Councillor Remington's point in praise of Councillor White, I absolutely agree with that. This will not pass the sniff test of the front page of the Waikato Times from a fiscal responsibility and a probity point of view. And Chris, I'm sorry, but you're a nice guy, but it's time not to be a nice guy. Director Williams, what I'm reading in your body language and your commentary is that you've been, it looks like, beaten into submission through no fault of your own. I think we have to be a little bit more assertive as a council. And I, for one, am not put off by your commentary around litigation. I think this has got to a point where we have to take a stand. Bear in mind, I'm reliably informed that when this organisation was founded, the trustees thought that it had a close date. It had a timeline, and there's record for that. I just think we are now being, as governors, weak. And I think we should give, through the Chief Executive, an instruction to you, Neville, to explore with haste litigation, would be my read on this, because we have tried every reasonable avenue. Early on in this triennium, we were shown this, talk to the hand, which I couldn't believe. We were asking for just a look under the bonnet. I mean, where do you see that sort of behaviour? That schoolyard behaviour. So I think the council's sending a message to you, Chris. We've had enough, and we want to be a little bit. I, for one, want to be more.
Thank you, councillors, for indicating a view and a clear view. I'll ask the CEO to respond before I will second it as well. The minutes.
Yeah, no, thank you. I indicated before that I will take it up. And just a reminder, we aren't the only party in this. There is the Crown, there is iwi, there's Taupo District Council, as well as ourselves. So it's not just a matter between ourselves and the trust. There's multi-parties, which you're well aware of, I know. But I will be taking that up.
Thank you.
Sorry, Neville, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just a brief comment, just to note that we do have the review to be undertaken. It is a Section 17A review. It will be done independently. We are timeline to conclude it before the end of this triennium, so that we will have a result in respect to what does the future look like. within that review, I'd expect that there'd be some indication of the true costs of the wind-up. So that will be something we will talk with the successful tenderer about, if that helps to alleviate some of the pressure and the risk. So an independent party being able to look underneath the hood quite clearly at what the operation consists of and what potentially might be involved in those wind-up costs. So that might be one avenue to get an independent appraisal of true costs.
Thank you. Just a last comment by Councillor Hodge and then Councillor Nebo. Councillor Hodge.
Kia ora, everybody. So this is my second term on here, and on my first term, I found it really hard to understand why this council hadn't given Kathy and I a clear view of what we were supposed to do. So, you know, just to let you all know, Kathy and I are two amongst 2, 4, 6, 8 other people. And when you get 6 against 2, there's no way that we're going to win anything. So, unfortunately, and I take my hat off to Neville and his crowd for the review and the afi they gave me and Kathy to help us get through this. And prior to that, I've come back to our ex-chairs, our other members saying that, you know, Kathy and I have been thrown in the deep end about how do we solve this. So from my perspective, without involving Kathy, is the majority of those people in Tūwharetoa are my constituents. Yeah. They are Māori. Yeah. So what do? Do I wear a hat of the Waikato Regional Council, or do I wear a hat of the Waikato Regional Māori Councillor who's been put on that board, on this board, for my constituents? And that's my argument I've been saying to a lot of the people around this table. I have 2 fights there. One is the fact that half of those people on that board is my constituents. We sit around this table saying, we are here for our constituents. So I go there and I am there for WRC, but in the meantime, I come back here and I fight for the constituents, for goodness sake. So I do feel for me and Kathy, you know, and I like to see if this is not resolved this year, how are you going to resolve it next year? Because you got to fight Taupo District Council because they are very on board with the iwi there. There's no way they are going to go against that iwi at all. No way. I don't care who you put up there and how strong you are still only going to be 2 amongst 6. And then we're fought up there against the Crown. I've had debates with the Crown about saying, hey, hold on a minute. You know, so I think Kathy and I have done a bloody great job trying to work. It's easy for you to say around this table, this is what we should have done, this is what we should have done. You're not the ones fighting at that table. It's me and Kathy against the other 6. And poor Neville and his team, who goes on a working party, he's still only 2 people against another 6. So good luck to you, Chris, really, because I tell you what, we tried to have a meeting when Russ was the chair. I called a meeting with Russ and I and the CEO of Tūwharetoa and all the members, didn't we? We thought we got to a good space. Go to the meeting, it fell over. So I do wish that people in the next council who's going to be on this committee to do better than me and Kathy, because we've done a damn great job, considering Kathy is from Tūwharetoa and under Māori constituent.
I don't think there's any question by council as to the efforts being made. You've heard that councillors are absolutely supportive of the efforts that councillors have been making on behalf of council. You know, we do have in standing orders which says when we hit this table, we acting as the regional council rather than constituents, but I know the challenges of having to work in that space. So there is absolutely no doubt that the staff and the councillors involved have been putting their best efforts, their best endeavours to get a resolution. The question we're now, I think, reached a point of where we've said we've got this very capable CEO, which the previous chair has made it very clear here's the capability. Whether there's a way forward that we can find, I understand there's politics in there that the CEO can't necessarily, he can't necessarily deal with those hurdles. And we'd like to see if there's ways forward that can be brought back to our governors to make some progress. It sounds as though from Director Williams that we have a report coming which might give us a degree of clarity that we can spring off. So if that is the case, then that's the opportunity to maybe, stand the ground there. So with that, thank you very much, councillors. And we have Stu K, which I noted before.
Yeah, just in reminding us that myself, McPherson and Remington recommended to this council that the review that Neville just referred to be undertaken, and this council endorsed it. We have to go through that process. But Neville, is the review likely to be usurped or hamstrung in any way by the trust being difficult? That's probably my main concern. Yeah.
Based on the conversations we've had with the candidates or the tenderers, no, I don't believe so. I think that they're very skillful people, very professional people, and that whomever undertakes it will provide us with a really thorough and objective appraisal.
Yeah, cool. Okay. No, thank you.
Thank you for that. So we've got a mover in Councillor White, and I've seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So we now move on to page 75, which is the Hauraki Golf Forum. Councillor T.
Yes, thanks, Chair. This was a meeting held in Gordon, just up the road actually. And just for your information, the next meeting of the forum will be in Pyro in August if anyone wanted to attend. There's a staff summary of what went on at the meeting and the minutes themselves, so I'll take those as read, but just draw your attention to three quick matters. First of all, there was a Crown representative on the forum who indicated that the Crown would not be proposing any new marine protected areas in the Waikato region. So if there are to be any, they will have to come through our coastal plan process. Secondly, there was a really informative and powerful presentation on koi carp, and I think that was highly educative to the members of the forum who weren't aware of the sort of impact of koi carp, which was great to see. And finally, there was some mention of a project called Revive the Gulf, which is essentially trying to restore the mussel beds, which were, very extensive throughout the Firth of Thames. So this is a very long sort of generational project, but the idea is to deposit mussels on the bed of the Firth in various places and try and restore those mussel beds. So that's a really exciting project. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll move.
You have the move and Russ, Councillor Hodge seconds. Russ, you have a question or comment?
I have a question, two questions. One is, Dennis, in regard to, I saw in the paper, it was actually on TV1 News, in regard to the mussels and how they put them in secret locations. I think that's all very good stuff. I thought it was a spat they used to kind of to get mussels regenerated. How does it all work? By dumping the mussels, do they actually connect and then start kind of growing, breeding? Does it all work?
Yeah, that's essentially it.
Okay. Yeah. The second question, don't take offence in this, through you, Mr. Chair, where are we with the letter that was written to me in regard to concerns on Councillor Tegg on what he allegedly said at a Hauraki Forum meeting? Now, obviously not chair, and I couldn't hear it. It was perceived as conflict, and any doubt I just stood away. So where are we on that matter now?
That matter, there has been a letter sent. It concerns me if you haven't received it, but I'll ensure that Democracy Services check about that when it was sent, and we'll make sure you have a copy of that.
Well, could we hear about it now? It's not confidential. What's the answer?
Well, we don't have that letter here, and I think if you haven't seen the letter, it's appropriate that you actually see that letter, because I understand it was sent some time ago.
Through.
Yeah. You want to hit your light there? Yeah. Take this.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think letter was sent to the complainants and the other recipient of it, where code of conduct complaint was made, and it's been sent to the as I say, those parties. When Councillor Remington was the chair, he was dealing with the matter, but you dealt with it when you came back into the chair role, and when you came into the chair role.
That's right. So the letters have been sent, yeah. Is it appropriate for former chair to see that or not?
It's a decision that you made as chairman at the time,
that's
so
right.
it could be a decision that you need to make.
Thank you. Councillor Litchfield?
Yes, thank you. It's back to the mussel reseeding program. That it's sort of a double-edged sword in that by reseeding the Gulf, we'll be removing food from the mussels that are being farmed. It's an issue where the nutrient that's coming out of the farmland or off the farmland is actually feeding these aquaculture farms. So really, it's a bit of a dilemma where we've got one industry and their byproduct feeding another, which has a substantial return for our economy. So I think this really needs to be looked at and thought through a bit more carefully than what we're currently doing. Like removing sediment is an extremely good thing, but when it comes to nutrient in the marine environment, it doesn't really have negative impacts, and it seems that we're still under the impression that nutrient in a marine environment is negative. So just a thought there, because again, if we're going to load the Gulf up with mussels, we're going to end up with skinny mussels at Pack and Save. Thank you.
I've also heard that climate change and the effect on temperature has an effect as well. There's these matters to be raised. Have I got a seconder? Councillor Teggs moves it. Councillor Hodge seconds. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Last item before we take a break, and that is civil defence. I just want to make a comment before the Chair of Civil Defence covers this item, that there's an adjustment to the minutes to recognise my attendance. It is recognised in the body of the minutes, but not in the attendance record. So I was actually in attendance for some considerable amount of time before the Chair recognised I was there. So with that, Hugh.
Next time you attend one of my meetings, please sit so that I can see you and don't sneak in the back and sit behind me where I can't see you. Not that it would have made any difference. People, I've been involved with civil defence now for 24 years. It's been a total and utter bloody disaster for many of those years because the territorial authorities would take no responsibility or even recognise the group of having responsibility to do something. They preferred to do their own thing and put minimum money into it. At the meeting that Barry attended, we recognised Langley Cavers. Now, in 2010, it was where we got assessed through all other CDM groups in the country, and we came out 15th out of 16th. We were second last. And the people that were behind us were Wellington, who they had to be real bloody bad to be worse than us. And that was at that time in 2010 when we said, we've got to do something about it. Langley Cavers, the Chief Executive of Hauraki District Council, put his hand up to lead the officer group that is involved in that. I put my hand up to take over as chair of the group. And Langley, at the meeting that we had just here, stood down after serving on that from 2010 to 2022. It has turned around. We are now fourth in the country, and it is going exceptionally well. So I'd just like to acknowledge Langley's involvement in getting it to there. Otherwise, civil defence runs very well. It has got the respect of the region, and it is operating exceptionally well. Any questions? I move the motion, and
I'll second it, and I'll make the comment that, in your term, you've managed to convince the Chair of Finance to increase the budget substantially.
To give us an overdraft too.
What
have we got, an overdraft? $5 million? Isn't that what we negotiated?
I don't know whether I approved that. But,
yes, you did.
I did improve an increase in the budget, and I do applaud your term in really bringing civil defence to a level of attention that is understood across the whole of the region. and it's shown its worth in being applied in a number of situations. So, and really got some accolades both from Wellington as well as from local TLA. So well done.
Yeah, that's in good shape.
Any comments? Yes, Councillor White.
Just a quick question, because I see that it talks about the report on the Ruapehu volcanic unrest. So I just want to know, how worried should we be?
Not at all.
Thanks for that. I only wanted a quick response, but you know.
Thank you. Councillor Nicol.
It's just for Councillor Verco, with the background of that, what do you see some of the key topics of going forward that you would love to see for the group into the future? To get better still, or embed something further, or?
Civil defence is being looked at by government for change. Initially, they were talking about massive changes together with everything else that the current government is doing, and amalgamations and everything else. They seem to have backed off on that. Some of the areas that gives me concern is that the welfare is being managed by MSD, and 100% of the costs of welfare are reimbursed by government. All the other costs are not, but let's concentrate on welfare. So in the past, we've employed a welfare officer who was Irving Young, that used to be MSD, does a very good job on that. Now, under the tweaking of the review, there are lead agencies that will be involved in a civil defence emergency, and health is the lead agency for COVID, and on welfare, they're now saying that MSD would be the lead agency for welfare. Now, this is fine, and if it's a massive welfare issue of flooding of the Thames Coromandel or whatever, and you've got massive welfare, if MSD is the lead agency, MSD can instruct civil defence to be one under the lead agency, in which case, if MSD then says we want 500 staff deployed immediately to the Coromandel, well, civil defence ain't got 500 staff, it's only the councils that got 500 staff. So therefore, the potential of this change means that a government department can control local authority staff to deploy where they think that staff are needed. And this is a bit frightening if it goes to that. So it is recognised as a potential problem. What other government agencies could have a lead agency under the agreement, in which case they are above civil defence? It's a very big change.
Just a question maybe to the CEO. Is the review of local government, does that cover civil defence as well?
I don't know the answer to that, but I know, as Councillor Verco referred to, there is an independent review in government at the moment about the National Monitoring, Emergency Monitoring Agency, which will probably, I don't know, Councillor Verco or Neville might be able to help whether that is going to be part of the future for local government, or just completely independent of it.
It's an independent review that is being undertaken. It's very high level, and we're asking for detail. You know, they're saying, oh, there will be a number of people that can be lead agencies, and we in the Waikato are saying, like what? What does that mean? Oh, we haven't sorted through it this time. It's the potential to take it through.
Thank you, Councillor.
Neville knows all about it, because Neville is our representative on KEG, and he was the one that supported us with our $5 million overdraft. Thank you, Neville.
Kia ora again, councillors. I'll endeavour to answer the questions, and my response may look a little subjective. So in regard to the review of the emergency, or the current Civil Defence Emergency Management Act, which will now be called the Emergency Management Act and undertaken by by NEMA, National Emergency Management Authority, yes, we will expect to see some changes, but decisions are a little way off yet, as are all of the government reform programs underway. But just in respect to the welfare component, and taking on board the Chair's views in respect to the risk and the potential for MSD to task local government, if it was given the welfare responsibilities with activities and actions in an emergency situation. Prior to here, I worked for MSD for many years, and I was also responsible for a lot of the welfare response activities when they managed the emergency management portfolio. none of those times do I ever recall us having to call on local government or demand local government participation in an emergency response. And I can cite things such as the Christchurch earthquakes and the event there, and everybody pulled together in a very constructive and voluntary fashion, relatively speaking. I know MSD staff were active on the ground. They have the capacity and the capability at a local level to manage the welfare response program. Whether or not they get tasked with that as a result of the review is uncertain, but I would just temper some of the, I guess, anxiety and apprehension that you may be feeling in that regard. I do not believe that would be an approach that would be adopted in terms of, I guess, compelling local government staff to undertake activities above and beyond what we would expect them to do anyway in an emergency scenario.
Thank you, Director Williams. Question from Councillor Remington.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just given the perhaps the threat of centralisation, etc., you've done a brilliant job, of which I can take no credit. You've done a brilliant job. The new headquarters over in the Genesis building, I think it's in this kind of special kind of seismic kind of rated building, etc. What is the exposure on that building? What's your lease on that if they did centralise it? Or would you still be using that building?
You're still using the local. We don't have problems with the local. We get on well with Gerard from MSD. There are no problems here. Our worry is the centralisation and the directives coming out of Wellington. And Wellington Ministry have changed in what they are trying. And Ministry don't have staff. So the Ministry of Civil Defence that are down there, if they want to influence us in the Waikato, they have no staff and they have no control over our staff. We're totally independent and we can listen to them and we can say yes or no. This is going one step further where Wellington, MSD, and again I take no problems locally, could activate and direct us who would direct you.
So we should be not so much worried about fault lines in this area, but it's the Wellington fault line we should be more worried about.
Oh, I wouldn't worry about that.
No, what I mean is metaphorically. Anyway, thank you. You've moved and I've seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Now we're adjourned until a workshop at 11 a.m, which I'll ask Director Williams to introduce at the workshop, so he's got a heads up. And then after the workshop, we'll have lunch. And then for those online, we're back at 12:30 for the start of ordinary business. Thank you, councillors. We're now adjourned.